Hey, I'm back with another video. This is a quick response to another video that Dan Lotz recently posted, posing the question about whether black and white movies are boring. I thought this was an interesting question because it's something I forget sometimes. I personally, I love black and white, and I have no issue with it. I don't. I'd never hesitate to watch a film that's shot in black and white. I think it's a at this point, I mean, I think it's an interesting artistic choice in many cases. So I come to this from the perspective of somebody who, most definitely does not think that black and white films are boring or lacking in any way. But I wanted to just add this thought that I had, in relation to this question. I think some of the response to black and white movies, and because I do know, of course, there are a lot of, there's many viewers out there who don't care for black and white, who maybe find it boring or whatever, but for whatever reason don't care for the choice. And I was thinking a little bit about, maybe why that is and why other people don't mind it. And I think possibly it has to do with when you're introduced to black and white movies, because black and white movies are no longer the norm. I mean, I think that's a pretty um, safe thing to say, right? That black and white movies are not the norm. I mean, if you turn on virtually any recent movie made in the last 50 years, certainly 60 years perhaps, any TV show, color is definitely the norm. But there's the question of what is gained by choosing to shoot in black and white. And at this point, it definitely represents a choice. I remember something I read once, and I don't remember exactly where it was, but I did think this was kind of interesting that, in the early 70s, there was a sort of a return to using black and white to evoke an earlier era. And I think especially like Peter Bogdanovich with The Last Picture Show and Paper Moon, Mel Brooks with Young Frankenstein. There was this brief resurgence of black and white films that were meant to evoke earlier eras, earlier films. And I forget exactly again where I had read this, but the point was made that in just a few short years, black and white had gone from being something that was a choice that would have been, I mean, it was less common in the late 60s, certainly, but it was still just, one more choice to go to being something, by the early 70s, just a few years later, being something that really required um, a lot of convincing on the part of the filmmakers to let the studio, for the studio to let them shoot in black and white. And I think the example was, if you look at a movie from, like, In Cold Blood from 1967, now that's in black and white, but it was done so because it's kind of like with movies like Psycho, that the black and white was a deliberate choice because of the dark subject matter. And while color films were certainly dominant by the late 60s, it wasn't considered, that unusual to shoot a film in black and white if the subject called for it. Billy Wilder had said in interviews that he really liked shooting in black and white. He continued using it pretty regularly up through 1966 with The Fortune Cookie. So The Fortune Cookie, Kiss Me Stupid, The Apartment, 1, 2, 3. These were all films in the 60s that Billy Wilder shot in black and white. These were comedies, by the way. So, these weren't even films that had particularly dark, these weren't, crime films or crime dramas or anything like that. So, again, it was just one more choice that filmmakers could employ. But what happened? It seems in that interim between like roughly let's say 1967 with the release of In Cold Blood and 1971 with the release of The Last Picture Show, was that black and white went from being an alternative to being something that was really unusual, for major Hollywood films. And then, of course, the black and white was also kind of hung on with low budget production. So, in fact, Dan talks about it in his video about Night of the Living Dead from 1968, shot in black and white. And I agree with Dan. I think it's really more effective for it. I think the black and white in Night of the Living Dead really does contribute to the sense of atmospheric dread that pervades the film, gives it a very haunting quality. And so again, I don't think black and white hurts films at all, and it's continued. I think I've actually seen more of it in recent years. I feel like there's more at least in the in the kind of the independent film world. There's more films being made in black and white, and I don't know at this point. I don't know how much of it is still budgetary, because I know, like, when Kevin Smith made Clerks in '94, he shot in black and white, but I don't know how much of it's still budgetary. I think a lot of times it really is. It really does just come down to an artistic choice, and one that I think often works quite well. I've used black and white in a number of my short films. Going back, Block, You Only Live Once. The Salesman. I even made, some of the comedies that I did, like Lunchtime, Dinner. Shot those in black and white. I like black and white. I think there's something about it. I think because color is so dominant now, that black and white, it's eye catching in a way, right? When you see a black and white film image, it almost catches your eye because it's not something you see a lot anymore. And I also think, depending on the project, it can help to focus the viewer's attention a bit on certain, I was going to say certain details. That may not be the best way of putting this, but it helps to create a more stripped down effect in some cases. So it can be used in a very rich, evocative way, of course, but I think in other ways, sometimes black and white can just kind of create this very stripped down effect that works well for certain subjects. I would say that was the case with Clerks, actually, that part of what it does there is it just kind of, it's part of this very stripped down style that, you focus on the characters and the dialogue in that film. But, like I said earlier, I think to some extent a viewer's response to black and white could depend upon when they are introduced to black and white films. Again, because they're not the norm anymore, they're not the standard, they're seen as something different, and I think that can actually lead to some of the resistance to watching black and white movies. Well, that and the connotation, of course, too, that they're older films, right? I think that sometimes viewers might have a kind of an allergic reaction to black and white films because they think they're older movies, and they, for whatever reason, may not be as interesting or whatever. Again, I don't share that attitude at all. So it's very, very hard for me to relate to, but I have heard it expressed. I remember one time in a class in high school, a teacher was going to show us Casablanca, and the students, there were kind of howls of protest when they found it was going to be a black and white film. So he actually had to go out and rent the colorized version to show, just to appease the students. And I remember being a little disappointed that we had to watch it in that way. I think that's another issue. That's a whole other issue about colorizing black and white movies. I won't even get into that here. But, again, I think it just shows how it's the same movie, basically, right? But it's this kind of reaction based on, whether it's in black and white or color. And I think you can argue that the color does change the film, certainly, because, again, it comes down to an artistic choice to have shot it in black and white, even in 1942. Even in 1942, color was available by then. Granted, it was still very expensive and reserved for, special films where it was really warranted. But still, I mean, it's, I think, frankly, it's an insult to the artists who worked on those films to insist that they shot in black and white just, because they didn't know any better, or they didn't think of using color or whatever. I mean, no, I mean, these were all choices. And that is one other thing I'll just add, which is, if you go back and look at some of the films from the 40s and 50s, after color was available, after it was a viable option, if you go back and look at some of those films from the 40s and 50s, to me, that were shot in black and white, to me, they're some of the most beautiful films. I think of some of David Lean's Charles Dickens adaptations, certainly film noir. I mean, the film noir style would have been unthinkable, I think, if it had been exclusively in color. And films like, like I said, Casablanca, I think really they shimmer in black and white. There's a really special quality to them because of that. Now, I think Dan's video was specifically addressing more contemporary films shot in black and white, and I could go on about that too. I mean, I still think a lot of what I've said about the choice to shoot in black and white over the years has remained the same. That the unique properties of the image, the unique properties of the black and white image, bring the same qualities to films today that they did in the 40s and 50s. I mean, it may be used in a slightly different way. Could be used to evoke more of a dark or foreboding atmosphere now than perhaps the kind of shimmering, romantic atmosphere of a movie like Casablanca, for instance. But still, I think what's important is, however it's being used, for whatever purpose it's being used for, it does represent a choice. And I don't think, for that reason, I could never view the choice to shoot in black and white as boring, because at the end of the day, an artist, a craftsman, cinematographers, directors have made that choice, and for me, I'm going to give it a chance and see why they made that choice, and see, what the individuals behind it felt it would bring to the project. So that's kind of the long version, I guess, of my thoughts on black and white. It's, like I said, for me, I guess my what it boils down to for me is, I would really hope that any viewer of, and certainly any serious viewer of movies, would not allow the fact that a movie is shot in black and white to keep them from seeing it. Because if you exclude black and white movies from your viewing, I think you're going to miss out on some of the most rich and evocative and beautiful films that have ever been created. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on that. All right, so thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.